Keynote about the future of wellbeing in Minnesota across all ages. The purpose of this keynote is to help explore some of the emerging trends that are shaping the future of wellbeing and draw the connection to how they may impact the environment that we're living in and working in Minnesota. So first, some introductions. My name is David Burrell and I'm the CEO of Future IQ. Future IQ is a research and consultancy company based in Minnesota, but working around the world. In our work, we explore macro trends and how they're shaping the environments in which we live. In today's keynote, I want to draw quite heavily on some work we've been doing on the future well-being. A lot of this work has been done in Minnesota, and it starts to develop what we think is an important value proposition for the topic of well-being in this state. This work ran through 2021 into 22, and I want to connect this to some of the work we've been doing in communities across the state and across North America. But here's what's most exciting. From the work that we did on the future of wellbeing, the foresight process, we explored a lot about the future of Minnesota and the topic of wellbeing, and we drew some powerful conclusions. So first, Minnesota has a compelling opportunity to contribute to the future of human well-being at all ages. And this was a conclusion that was drawn from a lot of foresight work, but also engagement with stakeholders who are working actively in the medical, health, and well-being sectors. The second conclusion we drew was that there is an opportunity to leverage the productive capability of our abundant natural resources in Minnesota. Minnesota is a global epicenter of food production, and food security are fundamental to human well-being, and Minnesota has an opportunity to leverage this capability in really creative ways as we go forward. And the third major conclusion we drew is that Minnesota has the potential to be a really important sanctuary for human well-being. We know from macro trends that climate change is going to radically reshape our world. Minnesota, interestingly, is in a very enviable position of perhaps being a little bit of a sanctuary or a haven from some of the worst impacts of climate change. So these were the deliberations, the key conclusions that we drew from this foresight work. And I now want to turn and talk about some different topic areas. The first one I want to dive into is thinking about age-friendly care and support. So the first topic I want to explore and dig into and think about how trends and emerging trends are shaping this area and bring extra potency and potential. So this first domain, age-friendly care and supports. So we have this big, broad goal that we're seeking, which is Minnesotans will have access to comprehensive integrated healthcare, long-term services and supports, and social services when and where they need them, with a respectful and well-trained workforce. And I think this is a really important topic, thinking about how do we deliver the services and the support to people where they are and when they need them. So several of the macro trends that I think are really interesting and worth exploring and really enable this topic area. So first of all, we see a future where increasingly healthcare services are being provided by a range of real-time methodology. You know, this sort of instant connectivity we have, the ability for us to be able to monitor our health, other people to monitor our health, and for us to be able to have real-time connections with medical professionals, and be able to kind of diagnose and manage situations, I think is going to be really important. This real-time delivery of methods to stay in touch and provide care and support. The other part that is really shaping this in terms of age-friendly care and support is there's an increased understanding of what drives well-being. I think if you look around at the moment, there's just a fascinating amount of work being done to really understand how to optimize human health across all ages. You know, whether we're, sort of young or middle-aged or moving into senior years, this ability to be able to really understand what we need to be doing to maintain our health and our vigor and so on. And I think that's a really exciting trend that's going to help us really help people be able to sort of build this their health and think about optimizing care as we go forward. Of course, part of what drives this is technology. And one of the things at the moment is we're in a world where technology is accelerating in its power and its speed. We would all be familiar with the advent of artificial intelligence and how that's really coming to the foreground in our lives. And what this chart looks at is this sort of digital technologies and their cumulative capability. And we're in an environment where we have sort of very important technologies coming together. So cloud computing, big data analytics, Internet of Things, smart machines, all converging, which obviously help us in our terms of our diagnostics and delivery of services, but they're also giving rise to artificial intelligence, which is going to further accelerate the technology power and speed and its ability to be able to contribute to human health. And if you look at this from sheerly a cost perspective, this is a chart that maps the cost of sequencing the human genome over time. So from 2001 to 2021, and you can see that cost of sequencing the human genome, which is the green line, has dropped exponentially. And of course, that translates to a lot more power in terms of technology being able to help us understand and manage our health. And if you look at that in just sheer numbers, we're talking about the cost of sequencing a human genome going from $100 million to under $1,000 in the space of 20 years. And you can look at technology after technology like this, but it's creating this world where we've got accelerating technologies that are helping drive human health and the management of care and providing support for people. But of course, the other very important part of this is geographic distribution. In Minnesota, we're sort of uniquely defined because we have this enormous metropolis, the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolis, and then we have these surrounding concentrations of population, the suburbs, the peri-urban space, and then these larger production and recreation zones with regional centers, communities, and tribal locations scattered across Minnesota. So Minnesotans need to be able to age well in each one of these contexts, whether you're in a community in the far reaches of the state, or you're in the middle of the metropolis, or somewhere in between. You've got to be able to sort of think about how to provide care and support. And of course, the question is, what strategies are needed in each one of these contexts? And I do think that we're starting to understand that better and starting to think about how we match services using technology, using real-time remote connection as people redistribute into and around mega cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul. So there's the first big topic, the age-friendly care and support. I now want to turn and talk about emergency preparedness and safety and the importance of that domain and what we see in some of the emerging trends in this topic. So we now want to turn and talk about the second big domain, which is this emergency preparedness, individual rights and safety. Again, a really important topic area. So we have this big broad goal, which is that communities, including long-term care communities, will be prepared for different types of emergencies, and Minnesotans are safe and respected at every age. So a really important topic, and there's a lot we could talk about. However, I really want to pick out one issue to talk about in terms of emergency preparedness, safety, and this is one that's going to affect us all. And I want to talk about really climate change and its potential impacts, but also talk about this continuous connection and real-time response. So one of the advantages of the technological advancements is the ability for us to be connected, and connected in real time. And that obviously helps thinking about emergency preparedness and personal safety. But if we think about this in terms of climate change, Minnesota may offer a relatively benign climate haven. And if you look at all the research that's going on at the moment, there's a whole range of potential impacts from climate change that are going to affect us. This chart here looks at the advent of extreme heat and humidity events, sort of decades into the future. And the red areas, particularly the bottom half of the US, are areas that are going to have really uncomfortable and increasingly severe extreme humidity and heat events. If you go to the very top end of the country and you sort of look at Minnesota and the states around the Great Lakes, obviously a much more subdued potential impact. If you think about other impacts of climate change, at the same time as this, we have the potential emergence of wildfires in the Rocky Mountains and the West Coast. We have coastal inundation potential on the coastal areas of the country. Interestingly enough, Minnesota may end up being a relatively benign climate haven. And this is part of our sort of deliberations in the future wellbeing foresight study, where we talked about this potential as a human sanctuary in Minnesota. But for sure, adapting our living environments is going to be a key challenge moving forward. This is something that obviously communities and municipalities across the state are already looking at. We're seeing increased tree planting, seeing social infrastructure in cities and so on. Whether you're in Bemidji or whether you're in Mankato, people are sort of really wrestling with, how do we design our public services, our public infrastructure, but most importantly, our urban environments, our community environments, our rural environments. How do we design those so that we're able to adapt to climate change and be able to create a better environment for people? I now want to turn and talk about the importance of social connections and what we're seeing in trends that we think will help shape stronger social connections as we go forward. So I now want to talk about our third big domain, which is age-friendly communities that maximize social connection. Again, another big, broad goal. Minnesota communities will have housing, transportation, environments, and broadband access that fosters well-being and maximizes social connections for all ages. So what's really interesting in this topic is there's obviously been a lot of work being done in Minnesota on this. If you go from, for example, thinking about Bemidji, where it's got a gigabyte broadband speed to houses, through to the urban environments in the Twin Cities and elsewhere, planners and municipal leaders are really thinking about housing and transportation and creating these social environments. I want to talk about some of the macro trends that we think are shaping this whole issue of planning and sort of evolving our landscapes and our communities to create these very important social connections. And of course, what we know from sort of healthy aging is that social connections are a really important determinant of longevity and long-term health, and they just enrich our lives in general. So we know that community connectivity is becoming more important as a driver in planning work. Increasingly, planning is looking at the way to construct and to facilitate and to encourage these social connections. So, for example, community landscapes are now helping create connections and reduce isolation. This was a macro trend that was accelerated through the pandemic, where we saw the use of outdoor spaces, public spaces, accelerate, jump dramatically, because they were so important for people to be able to connect and get outside of the sort of houses where people were at a sort of a stay-at-home environment. But that's obviously now become a part of the trend lines, where planners are very intentionally and deliberately thinking about how to create connections and reduce isolation. And this is a global phenomenon. You can see it in Japan, you can see it in the UK, where they even have ministers for loneliness and things like that, which are really all about how do we organize society and help people come closer together and be close to important connection points, but also transportation and services and amenities and so on. Transportation systems helping boost mobility. I think what's very exciting about the decade ahead of us is the sort of the advent of multimodal transportation, lots of innovation occurring, certainly shared rides, the advent of autonomous vehicles, the move to more intentional outdoor recreation. I think all of these things are going to help us create these transportation systems that boost mobility, and obviously that makes for sort of the well-being at all sorts of different ages, both just in quality of life and healthiness and fitness, but also the ability to be able to stay connected and be able to move around and stay mobile and active in our communities. And then, of course, the recreation and active lifestyles, we know that's important. And that obviously is driving social connections. And we're seeing that increasingly, but it's become a very important principle in urban design and in community design. And I think that's going to cascade through into our rural areas as we think about recreation and active lifestyle and how people undertake those pursuits, outdoor recreation, whatever it may be, and how they help drive social connections. So a very, very important topic area. I now want to turn and talk about the last big domain, which is the economic security and vitality. So again, a really important topic as we think about our populations and the demographics changing, how to ensure that people have security and are able to maintain vitality through different parts of their ages as they age in life. So let's now talk about economic security and vitality. So now turning to our last big domain, this economic security and vitality. Big, broad goal. Older adults will have opportunities to remain economically secure and will be recognised as valued contributors to Minnesota's economy and workforce. I think this is a really fascinating topic, and lucky for us in Minnesota, we have some tailwinds for this, which are supported by some macro trends, but also by a good, robust society and a very fortunate economic position. So let me talk about some of the macro trends and how I think they're going to enable economic security and vitality. Also, I want to pose an idea for how we might think about this in the future. So first of all, there's been a lot of research done, and I touched on some of this earlier in terms of the long-term impacts of climate change. We know, for example, the southern parts of the country are going to get hotter. We talked about that, but there are also other impacts in terms of human productivity, severe weather events, and so on. The long-term modelling at the moment is suggesting that the northern strip of the country is going to perhaps even see positive GDP impact, whereas the bottom ends of the country, the southern ends, are going to likely see GDP destruction or negative growth, or negative trajectory. So this is a really interesting long-term forecast. For these states that the north, including Minnesota, it does at least give us an indication that there may be some sides to climate change and the impacts that may have surprising consequences. One of these might be a migration pattern of people moving from the southern part of the country to the northern part. But for sure, it does look like Minnesota will have economic tailwinds as opposed to headwinds. That, of course, will contribute to economic security and vitality for populations and for aging populations. But there's another more important piece here too, I think, which is that we're going to see a demographic shift. So this is census data 2022 on the left, forecast for 2042 on the right, so 20 years into the future. And these are age pyramids where these are 4-year age increments, male and female. What you can see happens in this time frame is that the population of people who are, for example, 65 and older, that population gets significantly bigger. Now we know that people are living longer, but what we start to see in these age pyramids is a really significant cohort of people who are in those, what we would traditionally term as senior or retired sort of age groups of 65, 69 plus. This enormous bubble of people in society who are living longer, I think offers an extraordinary opportunity. Sometimes it's framed as, it's going to be this, kind of older group of society that we have to take care of. But I personally think if we get this right, this could be a most compelling and exciting outcome. So just imagine the potential power and knowledge, so the wisdom of a large experienced population cohort. And what if we can bring that knowledge and that experience and that wisdom, and we can bring that to bear on some of the human discussions in society? It could be a very exciting time, and it could give really deep purpose for people who are living longer and who in many cases are striving for continued contribution to society And obviously, we're going to be seeing more people. So I do think that this is potentially a very exciting area. I do think we have tailwinds in terms of economic security. I think we have vitality coming in terms of how we learn to live healthier, live more socially connected as we get older. But I also think that people have an opportunity to continue to contribute to society. And in fact, there may be a real potency in the wisdom of these populations of people who are aging, but aging in a really healthy way. So that's the sort of synopsis I've got of these macro trends and how they may come together to help shape the future well-being in Minnesota. And truly, I think there's a potential here for Minnesota to lead the way. Just as a concluding set of comments, one of the other sort of sets of conclusions that we drew from the future of wellbeing work, and I think has been sort of reinforced by the trends that I've talked about today. One, we have the opportunity to build on Minnesota's strong collaborative ecosystem environment. This state does have a collaborative ecosystem environment. In fact, you're part of that today, meeting in locations all across the state, people coming together to talk about how to solve important topics and how to create a desired future. There's an opportunity to deepen Minnesota's global fluency. It's already a state and a population that has great connections to the world. We could strengthen that and bring thinking and ideas from elsewhere in the world. There's also the opportunity for Minnesota to be really truly seen as a global destination location. Maybe it's part of that sort of climate haven, but also a place for people to go to talk about well-being. There's certainly a chance, an opportunity to aggressively pursue and build Minnesota's exciting and existing bio and health economy. So by bioeconomy, I mean our natural resource bases, agriculture and so on, energy, but also the very strong health economy. How do we pursue and build that? And then, of course, one of the conclusions out of the future of wellbeing work, and I do think it's the opportunity for us to seize on today and in the work going forward, is to develop Minnesota as a role model region in wellbeing services and technology. How do we get those services and those technologies together and be able to provide those to people in locations all over the state, whether you're in a rural area or a tribal community or a regional center or an urban core? How do we deliver services to people where they are and when they need them in a way that enhances human well-being for the individual and for the communities and for the population at large? So with those concluding comments, I thank you for your time. I hope this was of interest, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the discussions that are occurring all across the state today as we dive into this topic of the future of well-being. Thank you.